Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Apple. They've agreed to pay $95 million to settle a class action lawsuit that claimed Siri was secretly recording conversations and sharing data with advertisers.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you think about convenience and then you think about all the privacy issues and where is all this data going and
Yeah.
what are they doing with it? And
Yeah, it's interesting because the lawsuit's not just saying that it was picking up commands, they're saying that it was recording private conversations.
right.
So, like things that you wouldn't think that it would be recording.
Yeah.
Imagine you're talking to your doctor and you're discussing something very personal about your health,
hmm
and then later you start seeing ads for that exact treatment.
Yeah, and some of the users did report exactly that.
Right.
Yeah, they mentioned things like Air Jordan sneakers
Mhm.
or Olive Garden,
Oh, gosh.
and then ads for those very things started to pop up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the lawsuit was filed in Oakland, California, and it argues that Siri was activated unintentionally. It wasn't always a case of the user saying, "Hey, Siri."
Right.
And you think about all those times that you're having a private conversation around your phone with Siri actually off.
It makes you wonder.
Right.
Yeah, and this lawsuit covers U.S. users who own Siri-enabled devices
Mm-hmm.
between September 17, 2014 and December 31st, 2024.
Wow. So
That's a pretty big window.
yeah, a huge window.
Yeah.
So potentially impacting a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And Apple, they deny any wrongdoing,
Right.
but they've chosen to settle.
Yeah.
Now, $95 million might sound like a lot of money,
Right.
but for a company like Apple, it's pretty much pocket change.
Yeah. I mean, it represents about 9 hours of their profit based on last year's figures.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, it is a significant sum, but for a company of that size,
Yeah.
it's really not going to make much of a dent.
So if it's not that big of a deal for them financially, then why settle?
Well, so some legal analysts suggest that for tech giants, settlements like this, even if they're substantial, are sometimes viewed as a calculated risk.
Okay.
They may be choosing to pay out now to avoid setting a legal precedent that could cost them significantly more in the future.
So it's almost like they're factoring in these costs
Right.
into their business model.
Exactly.
Oh.
It's like a line item in their budget almost.
So how was Siri allegedly being triggered without people actually saying, "Hey, Siri"?
Well, that's where the technical details get really interesting.
Okay.
Experts suggest that there are a couple of possibilities.
Okay.
One is that there may be inherent flaws in the voice recognition algorithms themselves.
Uh-huh.
So background noise, even something as simple as like a rustling bag or a conversation happening nearby,
Right.
could be misinterpreted as the "Hey Siri" trigger phrase.
So Siri's ears are just a little too perky.
A little too sensitive.
Yeah.
Okay. Another possibility is that the microphones themselves are overly sensitive,
Mhm.
picking up conversations that weren't intended for Siri at all.
So either way, it sounds like Siri might be listening in on things it shouldn't.
That's the concern. And the real question is, what happens to those recordings?
Right.
The lawsuit alleges that the data was being shared with third parties, specifically advertisers, without users' knowledge or consent.
And that's where the real privacy implications come into play.
Exactly.
So what kind of data are we talking about here?
What could be anything from the mundane, like, your preference for a certain brand of sneakers,
Okay.
to the incredibly sensitive, like personal medical information you discuss with your doctor.
It's a little unsettling to think about all that information being out there.
It is.
Yeah.
And it raises the question of what constitutes a privacy violation in the digital age.
Yeah.
Is it only when our data is explicitly stolen? Or is it also about the erosion of our privacy through the collection and use of seemingly innocuous data points?
That's a good point. If companies like Apple, who position themselves as, champions of privacy, are engaging in these practices, what does it say about the tech industry as a whole?
That's a question worth exploring. This case might just be the tip of the iceberg, revealing a much larger conversation that we need to have about data privacy, transparency, and the role of technology in our lives.
And it all kind of boils down to this balance between convenience and privacy.
Right.
We love the ease of using voice assistants,
Mm.
but at what cost?
Yeah, it really does highlight that sort of tension between convenience and, how much we give up for that convenience.
Yeah. I mean, technology like Siri and other voice assistants, they
Mhm.
definitely make our lives easier in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Setting reminders, sending texts, even controlling smart home devices,
Yeah.
all with just your voice.
Right. And it's especially handy when you're multitasking
Yeah,
or you have your hands full.
absolutely. It's become so integrated into our lives.
Right. But all of that ease, all that integration
Yeah,
often comes at a price.
right. And that price is often our privacy.
Because in order for these devices to be truly helpful, they need to be listening.
Right. They have to be listening.
And sometimes that listening goes beyond what we intend or even realize.
And that's really the core issue here. The lawsuit alleges that Siri was activated and recording conversations, even when users didn't explicitly say, "Hey Siri."
So it's not just about what we're consciously choosing to share with these devices.
Right.
It's about what they might be picking up unintentionally.
Exactly.
And that's where the real privacy concerns come in.
That's where it gets a little bit dicey, yeah.
So it's not just about the recordings themselves, it's also about what happens to that data.
Right. Is it stored? Is it analyzed? Is it shared with third parties?
Right, and that's something that we as users
Mhm.
need clear and transparent answers to.
Absolutely. We need to know what's happening with our data
Right.
and how it's being used.
And it seems like the current safeguards might not be enough. I mean,
Mhm.
if something as simple as like the rustle of a bag or a conversation in the background
Right.
can trigger Siri.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how secure our data really is.
Exactly.
It does raise concerns, and it also makes you think about how much control we actually have over the technology that we invite into our homes and into our lives.
Right. Are we really in control,
Right.
or are these devices sort of dictating the terms of engagement?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's something that we need to be more aware of, I think.
And this isn't unique to Apple either, is it? I mean, Google and Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
they all have their own voice assistants.
Right. All the big players are in the game.
So it seems like as a society, we're becoming more and more comfortable with the idea of devices constantly listening in.
It's a trend that's been growing for years. And as smart devices become even more integrated into our daily routines, I think it's only going to accelerate.
Right. Some people might argue, well, if you've got nothing to hide,
Right.
then what's the big deal?
Yeah, that's a common sentiment.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that privacy isn't just about hiding secrets.
Right.
It's about having control over our personal information and how it's used.
It's about having the right to determine who has access to our thoughts, our conversations, our lives.
Exactly.
Even if you believe you have nothing to hide, you never know how that data might be used in the future.
That's a good point.
Data breaches are becoming increasingly common.
Right.
And information that might seem harmless today could be used against you in ways you never imagined tomorrow.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, you might not care about privacy today, but you might care about it tomorrow
Right.
when it's too late.
It's a valid point. And once that data's out there,
Hmm.
it's very difficult to get it back.
Pretty much impossible.
Yeah, so even if you're not overly concerned about privacy right now,
Right.
it's worth considering the potential long-term implications.
Absolutely. Think about the future. Think about how this data could be used down the line.
This situation with Siri and the questions that it raises
Yeah.
seems to highlight the need for greater transparency from these tech companies, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I think users need to be clearly informed about what data is being collected, how it's being used, and who has access to it.
Right, we need more than just,
Right.
vague privacy policies.
Yeah, we need clear, concise
You
answers.
need straight talk.
Exactly.
So how do we navigate this future where these devices are always listening while still protecting our privacy?
It's a challenge, but I think there are a few key things to consider.
Okay.
First, we need greater transparency from these tech companies about how voice data is collected, stored, and used.
Right. We need to know what's happening with our data, and we need to have control over our privacy settings.
Absolutely. It can't just be buried in some lengthy privacy policy.
Right. It's almost like informed consent, something we expect in other areas of our lives, like healthcare.
Exactly. We should have that same level of transparency when it comes to our digital data.
What else?
I think we also need stronger regulations and enforcement mechanisms to ensure that these companies are held accountable.
Yeah, because it seems like right now the law is constantly playing catch up
Right.
with technology.
Trying to keep up. Yeah. And we need to bridge that gap and create regulations that are both effective and adaptable.
So we need companies to be more transparent, and we need stronger laws to hold them accountable.
Right.
Is there anything else that can be done?
I think there also needs to be a much greater emphasis on user education and awareness.
Okay.
People need to understand the risks associated with using these devices and make informed choices about how they use them.
So we can't just blindly trust
No,
that our privacy is going to be protected.
we have to be informed and proactive.
What does all of this mean for the listener?
Well, it means being aware, staying informed, and being willing to advocate for your own privacy.
In this world that's becoming increasingly reliant on this technology.
Exactly. And think carefully about the choices you make when it comes to technology.